welcome to episode number 158 of the LSR podcast. My name is Matt Brown, joined each and every week by the brightest minds in all of the gaming industry with me. I have Dustin Gowker. I have Adam Candy. You can follow them on the Twitter machine for absolutely free, and you should, at Dustin Gowker, at Adam Candy, 2 E's, no Y. And if you hate yourself, you can follow me at Matt Brown M2. If you're watching us on YouTube, appreciate that. Go ahead, hit the subscribe button down below. We do appreciate that. And of course, on the audio side of things, subscribe, rate, review. If you do leave a little comment, it does help us climb the charts, makes us seem even more important than we already are. So we could really use some more reviews in there as well. So if you don't mind dropping a comment in there, we do appreciate it. Could there be one of the big boys from rest of country coming to Nevada? We will talk about that in just a second. We'll talk about where does Penn sit in Canada from a technology standpoint. We'll see. Check in Virginia. We'll also look at some Canadian numbers. But Adam, let's kick things off here with what is a very, very big story in our bubble here. And certainly if you are up in the Northeast, we have a new state. It is a state in which one of the big gaming companies is located. It is a state in which, best or worst, depending on who you talk to, fan base in the world, we now have Massachusetts on board.
Mind you, the person that you are talking to is a New Yorker by birth and by allegiance, and so I have my own thoughts on that. But I will say this much. Wicked awesome. Good job there, Massachusetts. It took until 5 a.m. Monday morning, roughly 5 hours after the original deadline for the end of the legislature in Massachusetts, but a compromise was reached between the House and Senate on their two sports betting bills, and that means that at the earliest by later this year and probably by the Super Bowl, you will have legal sports betting in Massachusetts. It is a bill that does not look too dissimilar to others that we've seen throughout the country. They end up settling at a 20% tax rate on mobile, 15% on retail. There'll be 7 standalone licenses. The 3 existing casinos will have skins available as well. You could see as many as 15 brands in Massachusetts. You will see all of the big ones, including the one that you referenced there, Matt. DraftKings, of course, is headquartered in Boston. What we were waiting on was to see, with this conference committee between the House and the Senate, who had passed very different bills, if they would be able to reach a compromise. Now, I just mentioned they obviously did go with a tax rate that looks a lot more like what the House wanted than the Senate. The Senate had proposed something in the range of 35% for the tax rate. The big sticking point, according to our Mike Mazzio, and by the way, welcome to Mike Mazzio on the LSR staff. Mike Mazzio talked to one of the conference committee negotiators who said that the college sports ban was the biggest issue that they had to work through. Now, the Senate had a total ban. It ended up being reduced down to just a ban on betting on in-state colleges. That ban will be lifted during March Madness, so you will have the ability, should we have a return to the John Calipari glory days for UMass, you will have the ability to bet on them during March Madness to win the tournament, not on individual games. So that is taken care of. There was potentially going to be a whistle-to-whistle advertising ban that came out of the Senate bill. That went away as well. So what we ultimately ended up with in Massachusetts was a bill that looked a lot more like the more reasonable one that the House had passed all the way going back to last year. So that was a bill that took about a year to make its way into and through the Senate with their own version. And by 5 a.m. Monday morning, there was legal sports betting approved in Massachusetts. Still waiting on the governor's signature, but that is expected to be a formality.
Dustin, you and I and Adam have joked about this, as we've been, years now that we've been doing this podcast, of this whole college sports betting hang up that we continue to get. There's a little thing called Venmo and like PayPal and all this stuff. It's like, it's not like you got to meet them on the corner if really these guys want to, do anything nefarious or whatever. But it is one of those things where we have found now, at least in a few different states, where there can be this kind of like olive branch, this compromising point where we can say, okay, well, how about this? We won't do it on in-state colleges. And still, whenever we do things like that, we laugh, but it has been something that's kind of helped things get across, at least opened up other conversations and or helped things get across the finish line.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bad policy. I mean, if you're legalizing sports betting, you should be legalizing everything that's legit to bet on, which should include D1 college basketball of all sorts. There's no gains in integrity from getting rid of in-state schools. That being said, you're absolutely right. If this is the one little thing that that policymakers and legislators want to say, well, we're going to stop it from happening in our schools. Okay, great. I mean, if that's not true, but if that makes you sleep better at night and get sports betting across the finish line, by all means, do that. Again, it is just crazy, but again, much better that they did this in-state school ban rather than a full ban on college sports, because I'm not going to say you shouldn't legalize sports betting at all if you're not going to have college betting, but it's you're not accomplishing anything. You're really creating then a much inferior product to the offshore sports books, which are again going to happily continue taking your money to bet on college football and college basketball.
Adam, what are we looking at as far as operators that we can expect to see, or I should say that the people in Massachusetts can expect to see?
Well, the most important thing to keep in mind is that when we say existing casinos get skins, we're talking about MGM and Wynn as some of the major players who already have a presence there. And the biggest thing in terms of those is Wynn, because Wynn has kind of pulled back in a lot of places in the country, but I do think they feel they have an advantage in Massachusetts having the brick and mortar there to be able to get a retail sports book potentially open before mobile begins and be able to build up a customer base that way. So that is an advantage for them. With the 7 standalone licenses, you can pretty well point to the usual suspects that you'll expect to see in Massachusetts. Of course, as we mentioned, MGM and Wynn accounted for already. So you're talking about FanDuel, DraftKings, PointsBet, Caesars. I think the one that will be interesting to watch, two really that'll be interesting to watch, Fanatics in particular is one to keep an eye on, because we know that this is right around the time that they're making their big push. We expect them to show up in New Jersey. They're obviously pushing in California as well. And then I think we're all kind of waiting to see, is this going to be one of the 365 states? 365, of course, is in the range of time when we'd heard that they were going to make a push into as many as 10 states this year. So with 7 standalone licenses, that's part of why we say don't expect it to start immediately, even though you're hearing rumblings of, air quotes, football season for the legal sports betting apps in Massachusetts. Keep in mind, you still have to go through not only a rules and regulations process, but an application process for licenses that could end up not being granted to everyone who puts in an application. And so I'm going to give the one caveat, Matt, that we always end up having to give around this time, because even an outlet as sharp as Pro Football Focus put this out earlier this week and said, legal sports betting is here in Massachusetts. No, it's not. And the offshores are excited to be able to use this confusion right now over the next few months to push their products on the people of Massachusetts even harder, because, hey, it's legal now, right? Well, no,
right.
Those offshores that were never legal are still not legal and aren't going to be legal.
And Dustin, we're looking at about the 15th most populous state, a population kind of right there with Arizona. We know Arizona has been a really pleasant surprise in all this. We thought that it would do well. I think it has exceeded the expectations of not only us, but even the operators themselves. I've talked to a couple of different guys out there who were like, hey, look, we thought it would be big. We didn't think it would be this big. So when we talk about Massachusetts, and we do talk about, the Pats fans and the Celtics fans and the Red Sox fans and the Bruins fans and stuff like that, what do you kind of estimate from where Massachusetts will slot in the grand scheme of things?
Yeah, I mean, this is the dynamic of just sports crazy fans, right? Like the entire state, Boston is huge. These are the most rabid fans, maybe outside of New York, right? I'd say in our country. So, and they're primed for this. I think Yeah, I'm not going to say that's going to lead them to over-index in terms of that, but it's going to be it's significant, and it's going to be like when they launch, I think will be a big part of that. Obviously, no chance we're going to see online sports betting before the NFL season. Launched in the middle of it or around the Super Bowl, there's going to be a huge uptake, I think, around that. You've got, and you have, even though DraftKings has only done DFS there, they are kind of ingrained in Boston, Massachusetts culture. People know what DraftKings is if you live in there, whether that leads them to be be a number one with a bullet in Massachusetts. We'll see, but it'll be a big state for sure. It could definitely has a chance to over-index in terms of population and what we've seen across the U.S.
So, Adam, being a native New Yorker, is Boston the absolute worst, like the nut low when it comes to fans? Like, or do you acknowledge, say like, no, we're the best, but like, they're a distant second? How does that work?
All right, I'll tell a little story to explain my answer here. So we were just in Boston for the National Council of Legislators from Gaming States, the Nickel G's conference in July, and we had the opportunity to go to a couple of Red Sox games. And as it so happened, it was Yankees-Red Sox while we were there. So I'm a Yankees fan in Fenway Park, and I'm looking around this baseball cathedral, and I'm listening to these fans, and I'm expecting myself to think, no, you know what? I actually had a lot of respect for it. Like, I found myself thinking, this is pretty cool. Like, and so what I really noticed was that Dustin took the opportunity to leave Philly fans entirely out of the discussion of most rabid nut low. Really? Philly just escaped from that discussion real fast, didn't it?
We're off. We have awful Mets fans. Mets fans. We can all agree are the worst.
Yeah. So we'll go there. We'll go there. We can agree at least on that. Dustin, so let's talk numbers in Canada while we're at it,
or a lack thereof. It was really the story. All right, let's go back here. Ontario launched online gambling April 4th. It is almost 4 months later, August 3rd, as we record this. We got nothing. We got bupkis from Ontario in terms of numbers and reporting, which is borderline crazy to me. Like, this is like, we make fun of states that are slow, and no state has been this slow, I don't think. Correct me if I'm wrong, Adam. Even the ones that trail by almost 2 months, nobody has taken this long to report numbers and what. And I was just in Toronto, and everybody for conferences around sports betting, and everybody's talking about how great a success this has been. It's like, okay, great. What is your proof of that? Because right now we're just relying on your word that this has been a great launch here in Ontario with moving people to the gray market, new operators coming in. We have no revenue to see if this is being effective and how good it is. We should get some transparency into this. And again, this is the transparency we get in most of the U.S. states where it's there's a law where this is part of gaming revenue and it's reported. So we thought we had heard whispers is going to be in July, and again we're now we've turned the page to August. Nothing. So we can't really say what Ontario has done until we start seeing these numbers, how effective they are, how effective is transitioning the gray market, the existing operators who already served Ontario and then got regulated. How much is that? How much are the new brands that have not been in there? How much is that impacted? Because it's real hard for us to sit here and say Ontario has been good or bad without that context of what the numbers are. You can't really. It's almost impossible to say this has been good or bad without that. So. Good piece over there up by Pat Evans on LSR about this, like wondering where the numbers are, and hopefully we'll see them maybe this week or maybe this month, or we'll keep waiting. But it's getting kind of crazy that we haven't seen anything out of Ontario reporting yet.
Adam, we talk about states so in nuance because everything is different from state to state to state to state to state. And, we talk about it, okay, well, this is the tax rate here, and then this is this here, and this is whatever. Well, Virginia is entering a new phase over there, which again, it's one of these things where if you didn't pay a lot of attention when things got going, you might not have known that this was even happening, but very interesting from how people will be marketed to over in Virginia.
It's going to be very interesting to see how sportsbooks respond to not only this new Virginia situation, but you're going to see something similar in Colorado before very long as well. So the new fiscal year just kicked in Virginia, which means a new law just kicked in that phases out promo deductions for a number of sportsbooks. Essentially, when we talk about promo deductions, we're talking about when you're offering free bets or match bets, etc., that are essentially free money for bettors who are coming and trying out your product. Well, these states, most of them in fact, allow sportsbooks to deduct the promotional costs from the revenue that is used to determine how much tax comes into the state. Now, if you don't pay close attention to this, you might not notice that this is millions upon millions of dollars that is being deducted from revenue every month, which, of course, when you're talking about a 10, 15, 20% tax rate, well, what you're seeing is that when you have tax rates that are, I know to some high, but those really aren't all that high when you compare it to a New York or a Pennsylvania, that cuts in significantly to the amount of money that the state gets. And what you see is a lot of folks who were either against legal sports betting or using these numbers as a cudgel against those who were for it are saying, well, you're not bringing in any money, right? And so now what happens is July will be the first time that sportsbooks in Virginia, 7 of them, and you can read our article by Matthew Waters to see which 7 at legalsportsreport.com, are going to end up not allowed to use their promo deductions away from their revenue anymore. Colorado has a new law just passed this year that's going to phase out those deductions over time for sportsbooks. Now, Matt, to your point, what does that mean? Well, it could potentially mean that you see less promos, less free bets offered to you in Virginia, in Colorado, and elsewhere. In fact, this was a big point of contention in not only New York, where there are no promo deductions allowed on the 51% tax rate, but we just saw it in the Massachusetts legislation where that was a sticking point, and promo deductions are not going to be allowed in Massachusetts either.
Dustin, we talk a lot about Penn on here. Penn has been a big mover and shaker, lots of acquisitions, lots of moving around and shuffling, and we have some more shuffling from a tech standpoint here with Penn.
Yeah, we talked about a lot on the podcast, Score Bet coming to be acquired by Penn National recently. So Score Bet is now entirely on its own tech stack, operating only in Ontario. And the news and a great piece by Brad Allen over at LSR about this is what this means for Barstool and taking that tech stack and getting Barstool onto that. They have promised by Q3 of next year that should happen. Obviously, that's with the idea that it's going to be live for the next NFL season. And you know that when you talk about that, it's like migrating onto a new platform. That's something that's hard to wrap your head around. It's like, oh, that sounds kind of hard, but maybe doable. Like Brad really breaks this down in detail, like what goes into this, what other sportsbook operators have done in terms of this. And, you know, this seems like a pretty aggressive timeline, especially since we just saw, again, TheScore go entirely onto this because they onboarded their trading platform. So, you know, what we have is we're looking at little over a year from now, Penn is going to have Barstool on its own on this platform, or says they will. Well, the evidence we have is we have 18 months for Caesars to move it to entirely migrate from that when it bought William Hill to get onto its own tech stack. We have DraftKings buying SB Tech, took 15 months and is still experiencing growing pains from that. So this is it's a fascinating case study to see what this happens. And then in the background of all this is, does this move the needle for Penn National and Barstool? Barstool, you know, you add it all up, about 5% of revenue in the U.S. market. That's not a very exciting amount of money for the investment that they have made. Again, $2 billion into the Score Bet. They a much smaller amount. I think like $140 million for a minority stake in Barstool to use that as its brand across the country. So this is a big endeavor, and if it doesn't work out, then you know this is what we talk about. The Score. This is why they acquired the Score Bet. If this doesn't move the needle in terms of being able to create a better product and to serve customers in a better way, then this is $2 billion kind of up in smoke, other than whatever media money they get out from the Score in terms of just leveraging it as a media platform. So it'll be interesting to see. This is kind of put up or shut up for Penn and Barstool. Like if you do all this and you're still at 5%, there's going to be some hard questions to be answered over there at Penn National, I would say.
Adam, anytime anything pops up about Nevada, you and I, you know, the eyebrows raise a little bit. And this was super interesting. Now, we aren't 100% positive. I mean, there's still steps to go here, whether it's even going to come to fruition. It seems like all indications that it will. But it does make us start to wonder, are some of these rest of country, are some of these actual industry leaders out there going to finally take that next step here in Nevada?
It's a qualified maybe, and I'll explain why in a second, but I want to go back for a second just briefly to what Dustin mentioned about how Brad broke down everything about Penn and TheScore and Barstool, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention that Brad is going to be leaving for a pretty impressive opportunity that we'll let him share the news about whenever is appropriate for him. But this is the kind of story that separates Brad, and that I was so happy to have at Legal Sports Report for the time that Brad was here. He has been a singular person in this industry in terms of explaining how things work, and it would be negligent on my part not to give him his flowers on the LSR pod here for a minute before he takes on the next challenge in his world. Now, when it comes to the challenges in our world, Matt, here in the state of Nevada, they are notable when it comes to the apps that are available and the sports books that are here. What we're seeing, with proper credit for this story to Howard Stutz of the Nevada Independent, who's the first to report it, that we're expecting that FanDuel is going to be on the next Nevada Gaming Control Board agenda for approval to take over at least the retail branding of Boyd's sportsbooks in Las Vegas. Now, we already know these two companies are tied up in a market access agreement. Boyd owns a small piece of FanDuel. This is one of the first things that was announced after PASPA in 2018. It's allowed both companies to get into states they might not otherwise have been able to get into. What it doesn't do is bring FanDuel's app to Nevada. It does mean that FanDuel odds are going to be used at the Boyd retail sportsbooks. It means FanDuel branding is going to be on those sportsbooks. Of course, we know from talking to people across the industry that getting tech approved in Nevada is a very different story than getting tech approved anywhere else, which is part of the reason we haven't seen FanDuel, DraftKings, etc., in addition to the in-person registration requirement, which is the biggest impediment for the standalone companies like FanDuel and DraftKings. Will that be a foot in the door if FanDuel is approved to run the retail? Potentially. And I know you're excited about the markets that might become available in Nevada because of this move, because we already saw that Boyd had a pretty impressive menu of props beyond what other Las Vegas books were offering.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those deals where I even if it's an over-the-counter type situation, even if we don't have the app at the beginning, I mean, they just offer so many other markets that aren't available here at all. I mean, while it would be a mild inconvenience for me, I would make, the trip to go and make the bets across the counter and stuff because they're the only option. It would be the only option, right? It'd be the only game in town when it comes to stuff like that. I mean, Dustin, both of the companies talking about DraftKings and FanDuel used to be near synonymous with Las Vegas because every one of their big events from a DFS standpoint used to take place here. This used to be where they had every single one of their live finals. They would have huge, big parties. It's a perfect spot for all this because of the nightclubs, because of the restaurants, because of the actual physical sports books here where you can have these type of big watch parties with all of this stuff. And so we've been several years now without those guys having any sort of footprint whatsoever. So this is at least interesting from that standpoint as well.
Yeah, does this mean we're going to have wide open online sports betting in Nevada? I think we're still pretty far away from that, but Nevada is still a place. Like, it is still a place where people get onboarded to sports betting. Like, you will find people who do not bet anywhere else and will plunk down a bet at a FanDuel sportsbook or wherever in Vegas because it's there. It's part of the culture. You're like, oh, I'm going to Vegas. I'm going to put a bet down. This is not really changed, I don't think, in the world. Like, yes, there's new bettors being found in lots of places, but there's still plenty of states that are, and plenty of people who do not get exposed to legal sports betting. And this is still, if you're FanDuel or any brand that covets a national audience, I think you having a spot in Nevada, and again, being a placeholder for, someday down the road when you get the wide open mobile sports betting, then this becomes exciting for a lot more companies. And, I think we all agree that they will come, but it's still, as we sit here, easily years off.
I was going to circle back at the end of the pod here. Adam already gave some kind words as well. I've been fortunate enough to work with Brad as well over the last few years, not only here on the LSR side of things, but also on our sister side at the Line side of things. So best of luck to him in his new endeavors here. Dustin, I know, one of the major contributors for us, and he will certainly be missed.
I think Brad sucks. This is a win for us.
Just
kidding. Just kidding. Brad has done some of the smartest pieces over the last 2.5 years that he's worked with us. I think it's about 2.5 now. I learn something when I read Brad's stuff. Almost always, he's done a great job, and be sorely missed by all of us here at LSR.
Guys, as always, everything we talk about here on the pod, you can find over at legalsportsreport.com. So please go over there and read all of these great words for these articles that Adam and team are putting together. And of course, as we mentioned at the top here, if you are watching us on YouTube, welcome, and go ahead and hit that subscribe button, because we're going to really start to branch out this channel a lot more. And then if you're listening on the audio side, a little subscribe, a little rate. And if you want to drop a comment in there, that really does help us as well. You should follow Dustin on the Twitter at Dustin Galker. You should follow Adam on the Twitter at AdamCandy, 2 E's, no Y. And if you really hate yourself, you can circle back all the way to the beginning of the podcast and figure out how to follow me on there. For Dustin, for Adam, I'm Matt. Talk to you guys next week.